They say the hearing is the last sense to go when you fall into a coma. I never believed it until I heard my own father say, "Just let her go, doctor. We won't pay for the surgery." My mother didn't shed a single tear. She was already calculating how to divide my estate to fund my golden child brother's failing business. They signed the refusal form, walked out, and left me to die. But 24 hours later, my eyes opened. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream. Instead, I made 3 phone calls that dismantled their entire financial empire overnight. They say hearing is the last sense to go when darkness takes you. I learned that truth in room 412 of St. Jude Memorial. Trapped beneath the heavy fog of a medically induced coma after a reckless driver T-boned my sedan, my mind was entirely awake. I couldn't open my eyelids. I couldn't twitch a finger. But every word spoken around my bed echoed with terrifying clarity. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, her vital signs are stabilizing, but the subdural hematoma requires immediate intervention," Dr. Reynolds explained, his voice urgent. "It's a routine neurovascular procedure with a 95% full recovery rate. We just need your authorization as next of kin to clear the specialized surgical copay." The pause that followed was suffocating. "And how much is that out of pocket?" my father asked. His tone was flat, completely stripped of paternal concern. "Roughly $45,000 up front before the supplemental policy clears," the doctor replied. I waited for my mother to gasp, to plead, to demand they save her daughter. Instead, she let out a cold, calculating sigh. "Julian needs that exact amount to settle his commercial warehouse lease tomorrow morning, Robert. If we spend it here, our son loses his company." "Let her go, doctor," my father said without a shred of hesitation. "We won't pay for the surgery. Sign the refusal order. Nature should take its course." Dr. Reynolds was horrified, but they were already grabbing their coats. Within 20 minutes, my parents walked out, leaving me to die. For 12 years, I had been the silent architect of my family's comfortable life. While my younger brother Julian was celebrated as the visionary genius of the family, he was actually a serial failure. Every venture he launched crashed within 6 months. Luxury streetwear brands, crypto mining farms, high-end lounges. Julian burned through capital like kindling, and my parents always demanded that I put out the fire. I was the founder of Apex Logistics, an automated supply chain consultancy I built from a 2-desk office into an 8-figure enterprise. I worked 80-hour weeks, flew across 3 continents a month, and lived conservatively. But because I was practical, my parents treated my success not with pride, but as an open corporate piggy bank. "Your family, Claire. What's yours is his," my mother would lecture every time Julian's accounts went into default. To keep peace, I bankrolled them. But I wasn't naive. As an executive, I never gave away blind cash. I structured everything through my private holding trust. The 4-bedroom colonial house my parents lived in, registered entirely under my LLC. The commercial lease on Julian's downtown office, backed exclusively by my corporate guarantee. The black luxury SUV in my father's driveway, leased through my company fleet. My parents believed they were entitled to dictate my life and siphon my money. In their minds, I was merely the cash cow, while Julian was the golden heir. They spent years complaining about my busy schedule, ignoring that every luxury they enjoyed existed solely because of my labor. They believed my death would transfer my entire empire into Julian's hands. They had no idea they had just signed their own financial eviction notice. At 5:15 a.m. the following morning, the monitors in room 412 broke their rhythmic hum with sharp, rapid beeps. My eyelids fluttered against the harsh fluorescent lights, and a deep breath filled my lungs. Dr. Reynolds rushed in, followed by 2 nurses. When he saw my eyes tracking his movements, the clipboard nearly slipped from his hands. "Claire, can you hear me?" he asked, shining a penlight into my pupils. "I can hear everything," I whispered, my vocal cords dry and raw. "Including what happened last night." The room went dead silent. Dr. Reynolds looked down, a mixture of guilt and relief crossing his face. A rapid neuroassessment followed. Miraculously, the hematoma had stabilized on its own overnight. I was fully lucid, cognitively sharp, and physically intact. I didn't ask to call my parents. I didn't break down in tears. Betrayal of that magnitude doesn't leave room for grief. It demands cold, absolute precision. Doctor, I said, my voice gaining strength. I want full HIPAA privacy enacted immediately. Mark me as a confidential patient. If Robert, Eleanor, or Julian Vance contact this hospital, inform them only that the patient is no longer in room 412. Consider it done. Dr. Reynolds nodded firmly. The moment he stepped out, I asked the nurse for my personal phone from the patient locker and dialed Marcus Vance, my corporate attorney and, ironically, my father's distant cousin who despised him. Claire? Thank God. Your father told the board you were on life support, Marcus said, panic in his tone. I'm alive, Marcus. And we have work to do. For the next 20 minutes from my hospital bed, I orchestrated a complete financial blackout. I formally revoked all healthcare proxies, canceled the secondary corporate black cards registered to Julian and my father, and instructed Marcus to execute immediate default clauses on the residential and commercial leases held under my LLC. They thought they had abandoned a dying daughter. Instead, they had awakened their landlord, their guarantor, and their creditor. By 1 p.m., the trap snapped shut with devastating force. My parents and Julian were sitting in the private dining room of Le Petit Palais, celebrating what they assumed was Julian's impending financial windfall. My father was sipping aged scotch while my mother browsed listings for waterfront penthouses in Miami. The illusion shattered when Julian handed his corporate black card to the server to settle their $1,400 lunch bill. 2 minutes later, the server returned, discreetly placing the card back on the table. I apologize, sir. The account has been flagged as closed by the primary cardholder. Julian scoffed, pulling on my father's secondary credit card. Try this one. System glitch. Declined as well, Mr. Vance, the server said, now noticeably cooler. Before my father could demand a manager, Julian's phone buzzed with an urgent notification. Then another. Then 5 more. His commercial landlord had just sent an electronic eviction notice. Apex Logistics had officially withdrawn its corporate lease guarantee, triggering an immediate breach of contract. Simultaneously, his business account had been frozen. The $400,000 line of credit he used for payroll had vanished because the backing collateral was tied to my holding trust. Panic erupted at the table. My father dialed Apex Logistics' finance department, screaming into the receiver, only for Marcus to answer calmly. Robert, your company perks have been revoked. Furthermore, the residential deed on your home is being reclaimed under breach of occupant agreements. You have 48 hours to vacate. Vacate? Claire is dying in the hospital, my father bellowed, his face turning an angry crimson. I am her legal next of kin. Claire was released from ICU this morning, Marcus replied coldly. And she left specific instructions for you. The realization hit them like a freight train. My parents and Julian abandoned their unfinished meal, scrambled to find enough cash among themselves to pay the bill, and raced towards St. Jude Memorial. They expected to find a fragile, intimidated invalid. Instead, they walked into room 412 to find me sitting fully dressed in an armchair, flanked by hospital security and 2 armed bailiffs holding stacks of formal legal notices. The silence in the room was absolute as my parents and Julian froze in the doorway. Claire, sweetheart, my mother cried, instantly attempting to paint a portrait of maternal devotion. Thank God you're awake. We were so worried. We only left to secure emergency financing for your procedure. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pressed play on the hospital recording tablet handed to me by Dr. Reynolds, who stood beside the security detail. My father's own voice filled the sterile air. Let her go, doctor. We won't pay for the surgery. Sign the refusal order. My father turned ashen. Julian stepped forward, stammering, Claire, you can't do this to us. My business, our house, we're family. Family died in this room 24 hours ago, I said, my voice cutting through their excuses like glass. The bailiffs are serving your 48-hour eviction orders. The fleet vehicle in your driveway has already been repossessed. And Julian, the $400,000 in commercial liability now falls squarely on you. My mother burst into genuine tears, not out of regret for abandoning her daughter, but because the luxury she had fed on for a decade was gone in a single afternoon. Within 30 days, Julian filed for personal bankruptcy. My parents were forced to downsize into a modest rented townhouse on their meager Social Security. As I walked out of the hospital into the crisp afternoon air, free from parasites and sovereign over my own life, I realized one final truth. They thought they were burying a victim, BU.